Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of 55 plus training sessions that will help you and your team avoid fraud, compliance fines, and bad vendor data. Or just sign up to get access to vendor process FAQs and to attend weekly drop-in live Q&A sessions. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. So, we should all know by now that the IRS finally made the change that will require more of you to file electronically. And guess what you need to file electronically? Yes, a transmitter control code, or TCC. But you may need more than one, and even if you already had one, it may be deactivated. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 263, when you may need more than one TCC for IRS e-filing. All right, so we all knew it was coming. The IRS kept saying it, that the threshold of 250 forms, and it was per separate form, right? If you were over that threshold, you needed to file electronically. But anything below that threshold, you could file by paper with the IRS if you wanted to. And so this is copy A that would or is going to be filed with the IRS. Now has to be filed electronically if you have 10 or more forms, and it's not just of one form. Like, you have to count all the different types of returns. If they total to more than 10, you're filing electronically. So I thought this was a great time to talk about the transmitter control code. And let me just say that when I was a practitioner, and if you've heard any other podcasts, you know that my team used to process 2,000 vendor requests per month. We maintained 140,000 vendors across 7 different ERPs. And that really translated into 24,000, maybe 30,000 1099s, 1042s that we had to process each year. For some reason, we did all of that in-house. Can you imagine? But yes, we did do that in-house. Hopefully they're not still doing it that way. But every year we would take like an inventory. So we would take time to identify our TCC codes, and we would also not just the TCC codes, we would also just verify that everyone that needed a user account had a user account. And so let's first talk about what a TCC code is used for, and then we'll talk about user accounts, and then I will tell you I think it's 3 reasons why you might need a more than one, so another TCC code. And then I'll also talk about why, if you have an existing TCC code, you still might need to get a new one. So first, let's just talk about what is a transmitter control code, or TCC. And I will tell you right now that at some point in this podcast, I'm going to call it a TCC code just because that's what I do. But a TCC is required for electronic filing. It is a 5-character alphanumeric code. And if I remember correctly, it is two digits, so 2 numbers followed by a letter. and then it is two more numbers. At least that's the way it was. Could be different now. But in any event, it is a 5-character alphanumeric code. And the purpose of it is just to identify who's transmitting the files. And so if you've been a previous e-filer, right, you've been filing electronically, you've probably used the IRS's legacy system, which is the filing information returns electronically system, or a FIRE system. And if you, yes, you need a transmitter control code in order to do that, but you can have one transmitter code for your company, even if you file for multiple companies. And if you look in publication 1220, which is it provides the requirements for electronic filing for the electronic files that you would upload into the FIRE system, including those for 1099s. And so if you look in there, they'll tell you, hey, you don't really need more than one. Why would you need more than one? That's kind of like how they wrote it. But there are some instances where you may need more than one TCC, and there's also an instance where you may need to get a new one. All right, so let's start with 3 scenarios when you may need to get an additional or more than one TCC. So the first one really kind of goes along with the fact that the IRS requires a TCC for electronic filing, because that is how they know who the transmitter of the files are. And so there are 2 e-filing options. It's the legacy system that we talked about, the FIRE system, the filing information return system. And if you've been e-filing prior to this year, right, that's the system that you have used. Now, last year they came out with a new system that is called IRS. And IRS stands for Information Returns Intake System. And that really is for like smaller filers. And as a matter of fact, I think it's in publication 1220 where they're telling you, right, if this is your first year e-filing, then you might just want to use the IRS system instead of starting with FIRE. Again, it's meant for smaller users, although they've got some plans with it, because there are some options, like they have A to A, I think it's application to application, where it's like APIs so that it can integrate with your ERP. But I'm getting ahead of myself on that because I don't know a lot about it. But I think the IRS has more in store for the IRS system versus the legacy FIRE system. But in any event, they are different, and you might need them for different reasons. And so one of the big differentiators, so if you have to decide on doing one versus the other, is that the IRS system really is only for a limited number of forms, so it can only do the 1099 series, whereas the FIRE system can do the 1099 series. And then also, if you have non-US or foreign vendors, it can also do 1042s, where the IRS can't do 1042s. But if you find yourself in a situation where you need to file in both systems, and that will require a separate TCC for each. So if you need to e-file in the FIRE system, and then you also, for whatever scenario, need to file in IRS separately, that's going to require a separate TCC code. So that's one. Now, the second one is in actually, these next 2 are in publication 1220 for the FIRE system. And one of them is if you're submitting more than 1,000 files, you need to request a separate TCC. And then the third one is if you have a different form type than what is listed. And so for us, and I think for most of you too, we deal with the 1099 series, we deal with 1042. So US vendors, non-US vendors. So if you have vendors that you need to e-file for foreign vendors, and you need to e-file the 1042S, that is a separate TCC. You need a separate TCC code for that. And I told you I would say TCC code, but you need a separate TCC for that. And then keep in mind too that instead of looking at publication 1220, which is for your U.S. vendors reported on your 1099s, you really need to go to publication 1187, and that is for the e-file, specifications, requirements for that 1042S. And so I'm going to link both of those in the show notes so you have access to it. All right, so those are the three scenarios where you will need an additional TCC. It is when you have to file in both the FIRE system and the IRS system. So you're filing in both e-filing options offered by the IRS. So that's one. The second one is if you are submitting more than 1,000 files. And then the third one is if you are submitting a different form type, specifically the 1042S, because that's what we deal with here in accounts payable and vendor team. All right, so those are the three. And if you need more information on the application process and the links, I'm going to link in the show notes the publication 1220. I will also link publication 1187, and then I'm going to link the instructions for filing a TCC application for the IRS system, and they really do get into a lot of detail. So I'm going to link all three of those in case you need a separate TCC for each. All right, so the last thing I wanted to point out with those of you that had an existing legacy TCC, and this would have been for the FIRE system, and I think I talked about this on my YouTube channel because I do a Vendor Master File Tip of the Week every Tuesday, and I'll link to that channel, my YouTube channel, in the show notes. But I talked about it earlier this summer, and that timing is important because the IRS required existing TCC holders to complete a new IR application for a TCC. But if they completed that application prior to August 1st, 2023, then they could keep their existing, retain that existing 5-digit TCC. But if you miss the deadline when you file your application, and maybe some of you already have, you know that you're going to get a new TCC. Now, if that happened to you and you missed the deadline, you filed your application or will file your application and you're going to get a new one, that legacy TCC, the IRS will allow you to continue to use it either to transmit or retrieve, files in the FIRE system for tax years 2021 and 2022. But that's only through November 26, 2023. And as of the posting of this, publishing of this podcast episode, it's November 9th. So you don't have that much longer. And in addition to that, beginning January 2024, you will no longer be able to electronically file using that legacy TCC. Now, they do have an exception related to the 1042S. And so make sure you find out more information on that if you think it affects you. All right, so now that we've talked about the three scenarios where you may need to get a new TCC, and we also talked about why you may get a new TCC if you have that legacy TCC and didn't file your application on time. So we talked about both of those. Now I do want to just clarify something for those that are thinking, well, what about my users, right? We don't need separate TCCs for them. No, you don't. Each user can have their own account and they can share, the TCC slash, tax ID, whatever, for your company. So it just has to be established first, and then the users. And so when I was talking earlier about my team and us taking inventory, again, the biggest changes weren't in the TCCs, it was in the users, because you have turnover. So make sure that each user has their own account, and again, they can share the TCC. And this is great because you, right, always want to make sure you have backup for those folks that are doing your e-filing. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to mention, just kind of an offshoot, don't know if it'll ever happen to you, but if for some reason you have a TCC and it's not used for 3 consecutive years, it will be deleted. Now, I can't imagine not using a TCC for 3 years, but I've worked for medium, large, companies, and so we always had reportable vendors. I guess that could happen. No, I can't see that, because even with my own company, every year I have to file something, although I don't necessarily have to file electronically. So maybe some years you were over the threshold and some years you weren't. But if you don't use it for 3 years, it's going to be deleted, and you'll have to apply for a new one. Okay, and one other thing I actually really did forget to say is that the application process for TCC, the IRS says it's 45 days, and they recommend that you submit your application by November 1st. But I will tell you, right, because this podcast episode is definitely being published after November 1st, that when I applied for a TCC for the IRS system, because I told you I used it last year, it did not take 45 days. But I will also say last year wasn't the year where the IRS turned on the e-filing requirement for everybody. So the volume was probably much lower than what the IRS is seeing this year with that e-filing requirements. So if you think that you're going to have to submit an application for a TCC, it is time to do it now. Do it ASAP. But we're used to that in accounts payable, right? All right, so thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 263rd episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.